Good morning and welcome to the Sunday morning sermon for October the 26th of 2025. And we've been working our way through a series of messages entitled Keep Calm and Trust God. It's a series on the life of Joseph. We're into number 9 in that series this morning, dealing with a seared conscience. And we're looking at Genesis chapter 42, the first 28 verses. Let me ask you, are there things that happened in your past that the mere mention of those things creates a new sense of pain in your life? Are there things in your past, unconfessed, undealt with sin, that with the proper trigger can flood your conscience with a sense of guilt? I want you to notice this with me this morning. The gracious methods of God's awakening the conscience of Joseph's brothers. It may seem at first that Joseph is playing mind games with his brothers in this situation, but that's not what is happening here. What he's trying to do is he's trying to get them to face themselves and put away this treacherous trait that they are living with a seared conscience. Last time we saw that Pharaoh had a dream that no one was able to interpret. The royal cupbearer at that point remembers that Joseph is in prison and that he was able to interpret dreams. Joseph is called for and he comes to Pharaoh and interprets the king's dream. A dream that says that there will be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. The king is so grateful to Joseph that he's able to interpret this dream, that he puts Joseph in charge of implementing a plan to ensure that there will be sufficient food in Egypt during the coming famine. First of all, we want to look at the situation here and say that sometimes to reach a seared conscience, we must be put in a position of extreme need. The first 5 verses of chapter 42 read this way: When Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, why do you look at one another? Or why do you sit there looking at one another? And he said, Indeed, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down to that place and buy for us, that we may live and not die. So Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt, but Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin, for he said, lest some calamity befall on him. And the sons of Israel went to buy grain among those who journeyed, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Now, Joseph's brothers were reluctant to even think about the land of Egypt, because when they thought of Egypt, it caused them to think of their past sin. Over the course of the years, they had lulled their consciousness to sleep. But now God put them in a position in which they had to face the very place that troubled their guilty consciences. The 7 years of great abundance have come and gone, and now there's 7 years of famine that have hit with full force. This famine, which had been predicted in Pharaoh's dreams, created an international disaster because it had not affected Egypt, not only affected Egypt, but it also affected the surrounding regions. People from the surrounding regions heard that Egypt alone had provisions enough to survive the famine. And Jacob seems to see something strange in the way that his sons are behaving. For it says, when Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, "Why do you look at one another?" It seems strange even to Jacob, the way that they kept looking at one another instead of taking decisive steps when they heard that there was grain available in Egypt. And that shows that they're struggling with a sin that's over 2 decades old. Joseph's brothers are forced to consider traveling into Egypt to find food. With the famine, God gets their attention. God provokes a crisis in their lives. Sometimes God has to place us in some tough situations in order to cause us to reevaluate our condition and confess our unconfessed sin. In the story of the prodigal son, it was only after the son found himself at rock bottom, a difficult situation in life, and he finally comes to his senses and he goes back home. Well, that's exactly what God is doing for us as well at times. Number two, sometimes to reach a seared conscience, we must be put through the pain of harsh treatment. It continues on here now, the verses. It says that Joseph was governor over the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. Joseph saw his brothers, and he recognized them, but he acted as a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them. Then he said to them, where do you come from? And they said, from the land of Canaan to buy food. So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. One day Joseph looks up, and who should be arriving to buy provisions but his own brothers? His brothers who had thrown him into the pit to die. Can you imagine the thoughts that would have gone through Joseph's mind? 10 of Joseph's brothers arrive in Egypt along with many hundreds of others looking to buy food. Without even recognizing they were fulfilling the prophecy of Joseph's 2 dreams of many years before, they bowed down before him, an expression due to someone of such a high office. When the brothers came to Joseph's presence, they didn't recognize him. After all, he was only 17 when they last saw him, and now he's nearly 40 years old. All they saw was an Egyptian governor, and Joseph acted as a stranger and spoke harshly to them through an interpreter. All of the tests that Joseph faced, this test is probably the most difficult. Here were the very people who had abused him. They were utterly defenseless, while he had almost unlimited power. The temptation to retaliate would have been normal, especially when we meet face to face with those who have offended and hurt us. We want to retaliate. And it is at that moment that we discover whether or not we have truly forgiven. As the years have passed for Joseph, he's been willing to forgive the injustices that have been done to him. He had evidently forgiven his brothers. He had no doubt struggled with that forgiveness for Potiphar and Potiphar's wife. He had also been forced to deal with forgiveness for the cupbearer, the servant of Pharaoh, who, when he was freed from prison, he forgot all about Joseph. And after he himself had been released from prison, he didn't remind Potiphar of Joseph. Rather than allow it to spoil his present and his future, Joseph chose to put all of that aside. He had determined that he would not allow himself to be held captive by an unforgiving spirit. Joseph had put the past behind him. He understood that the past was just that. It was the past. It's all over with. There was nothing he could do to change it. Dr. David Seamands, in his book entitled Healing for Damaged Emotions, he says this: the two primary causes of emotional stress are the failure to receive forgiveness and the failure to forgive. Or as the great philosopher Lucy explains to Charlie Brown at the end of a baseball game as to why she lost sight of the baseball and failed to make a catch, she says, "Sorry I missed that easy fly ball, manager. I thought I had it, but suddenly I remembered all those other times when I missed catching the ball and the past got in my eyes." Don't let the past get in your eyes this morning, friends. There's a great struggle in each of us, in each of our lives, to forgive those who have wronged us, even though they may not have acknowledged any wrong. The Bible nowhere indicates that our willingness to forgive should be dependent upon the fact that someone has asked for forgiveness. Maybe as we've been talking about forgiveness, God has brought someone to your mind, someone you need to forgive. Right now, why don't you make that commitment to take the initiative in making things right? Be big enough to forgive. Well, verses 9 through 16 continue on with the story here. It says, "Then Joseph remembered the dreams which he had dreamed about them and said to them, 'You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land.' And they said to him, 'No, my lord, but your servants have come to buy food. We are all one man's sons. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies.' But he said to them, 'No, but you have come to see the nakedness of the land.' And they said, 'Your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And in fact, the youngest is with our father today, and one is no more.' But Joseph said to them, 'It is as I spoke to you, saying, you are spies. In this manner you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of you, and let him bring your brother, and you shall be kept in prison, that your words may be tested to see whether there is any truth in you, or else by the life of Pharaoh, surely you are spies.'" I believe that verse 9 there means more than Joseph merely recalled his dreams of the past. I believe that Joseph now recognized what God's purpose was for placing him in such a position of power. It was to preserve his family. His power and his prestige were more than just rewards for his faithfulness, much more than an opportunity for revenge. Joseph is subjecting his brothers to the same charges and a taste of the same experience that he had endured. He's not doing this as a punishment. This is preparation. He's doing this in the hope that his brothers will wake up to the nature of their actions. He's hoping that this treatment will make them come clean. Moving on to number 3, and number 3 tells us that sometimes to reach a seared conscience, we must be put through the press of solitude. Verses 17 through 23. It says, "So he put them all together in prison for 3 days. Then Joseph said to them the third day, 'Do this and live, for I fear God. If you are an honest man, let one of your brothers be confined to your prison house, but you go and carry grain for the famine to your houses, and bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified, and you shall not die.' And so they did. The time that Joseph's brothers spent locked up was very valuable. Solitude is often a valuable gift from God, even when there's no great sin to be exposed. In solitude, people are given the opportunity to meet with God. The frantic pace of our the busyness of our lives, often keeps us from God. The truth is that solitude is often necessary for Christian life and growth. Verses 21 to 24, continuing on here, it says, "Then they said to one another, 'We are truly guilty concerning our brothers, for we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. Therefore this distress has come upon us.' And Reuben answered them, saying, 'Did I not speak to you, saying, do not sin against the boy? And you would not listen? Therefore, behold, his blood is now required of us.' But they did not know that Joseph understood them, for he spoke to them through an interpreter. And he turned himself away from them and wept. Then he returned to them again and talked with them. And he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes." It's at this point that the brothers begin to talk among themselves, unaware that Joseph understands every word that they're saying. For the first time, they seem to realize that the relationship between their present predicament and their treatment of Joseph was just too obvious to overlook. Each of them acknowledged that their difficulties were the result of their sin against Joseph. They had pled for mercy and did not receive it, just as Joseph had cried out for help from the pit, and they ignored him. Sin always has its consequences, and they're just beginning to realize how painful those consequences can be. In the original language, the we in their conversation is emphatic. They say, "We are guilty. We saw the distress in Joseph's soul. We would not listen." They've made the first step in overcoming their seared conscience by taking personal responsibility for their own guilt. As far as they're concerned, Joseph's blood is imprinted on their hands, fresh in their minds, and counted on their record. Finally, number 4, sometimes to reach a seared conscience, we must see the proof of God's presence. Verses 25 through 28, it says, "Joseph gave a command to fill their sacks with grain and to restore every man's money to his sack, and he gave them provisions for the journey. Thus he did for them. So they loaded their donkeys with the grain and departed from there. But as one of them opened his sack to give his donkey feed at the encampment, he saw his money, and there it was in the mouth of the sack. So he said to his brothers, 'My money has been restored, and there it is in my sack.' Then their hearts failed them, and they were afraid, saying to one another, "What is this that God has done to us?" At some point on the return trip, one of the brothers opens his sack to feed his animal and discovers that his money has been returned to him. His money is still in the sack. The way that the brother reacts seems to indicate that there has been some positive growth here. Indeed, far from being happy about finding the money, it says, then their hearts failed them and they were afraid. The word that's translated afraid is the same word that's used to describe a great earthquake in 1 Samuel chapter 14, verse 15. Not only did they feel the full impact of their sin, for the first time they're sensing God's hand at work in their circumstances. They began to ask, what's God doing? Why is this happening to us? It's the first time in the entire story of Joseph's brothers that Joseph's brothers are said to have mentioned God. Reaching and dealing with a seared conscience. Sometimes to reach a seared conscience, we must be put in a position of extreme need. Sometimes to reach a seared conscience, we must be put through the pain of harsh treatment. Sometimes to reach a seared conscience, we must be put through the press of solitude. And finally, sometimes to reach a seared conscience, we must see the proof of God's presence. God bless. Have a wonderful day, and until we meet again, let's continue to exchange prayers daily.